You really think scrubbing floors is beneath you, don't you?
I think everyone has their place in this world.
Yes, they do.
Julian Mercer had never waited for anything in his 38 years of life. Not for promotions, not for board approvals, and certainly not for love. He was the kind of man who walked into rooms and made them rearrange themselves around him, 6 feet 2 inches of tailored ambition, with steel gray eyes that calculated risk the way other men calculated tips. As CEO of Mercer Global Holdings, a conglomerate spanning real estate, shipping, and biotech across 14 countries, Julian commanded a net worth that financial magazines refused to print in full because the number unsettled their readers. He had everything. Everything except the one thing no spreadsheet could quantify. It started on a Tuesday morning in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Mercer Tower in downtown Chicago. Julian stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, watching ant-sized people rush across the plaza below, and felt the hollow clanging of a life that was enormous but somehow empty. His last 3 relationships had ended the same way, with women who discovered his wealth and then loved the portfolio more than the person inside the suit. His therapist called it attachment avoidance. Julian called it pattern recognition. He had a plan. By Friday, Julian Mercer had leased a 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park, under the alias Julian Marsh, furnished it with IKEA furniture and second-hand regret, and walked away from the Mercer Tower with nothing but a prepaid debit card loaded with $2,000, enough to simulate the monthly budget of a struggling artist. His chief of staff, Daniel, would manage operations. His lawyers would manage silence. And Julian would manage to find a woman who loved him as nothing. What he did not plan for was Maria. Maria Okonkwo had worked the night cleaning shift at Mercer Tower for 4 years. She was 41, with deep brown skin that held the kind of quiet radiance that required no artificial light to notice, though most people never did. She wore her hair pulled back beneath a company-issued cap, moved through the marble corridors with an efficiency that made her nearly invisible to the men and women who passed without looking, and spoke only when necessary, which most people interpreted as simplicity. It was, in fact, strategy. Julian had passed Maria every evening for 4 years. He had never learned her name. She knew his. She knew far more than his name. While Julian settled into his poverty experiment in Wicker Park, Maria returned each morning from her shift to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Bronzeville that she shared with her teenage son, Emmanuel. She would change out of her uniform, brew a pot of strong Yoruba tea, open a second laptop she kept beneath a false panel in her closet, and begin her second shift, one that no employment record reflected. On the screen, cascading columns of market data moved like rainfall. Maria's fingers moved faster. She had been trading for 11 years. Not casually, not hobbyistically, with the disciplined ferocity of a woman who understood that invisibility, when weaponized correctly, was the most powerful position in any room. She had started with $4,000, saved across 3 years of double shifts money. She had refused to spend on anything that could not grow. She had read every book she could borrow. She had taken free courses at 2 in the morning while Emmanuel slept. She had made mistakes, absorbed them without flinching, and built something that no one who looked at her would ever think to question. Nobody noticed the offshore entity called Meridian Quiet Capital. That was the point. The most sophisticated financial structures in the world were operated by people who understood one fundamental truth, that the world systematically underestimates those it refuses to see clearly. Maria had built her entire strategy around that underestimation. It was not bitterness, it was architecture. Back in Wicker Park, Julian was fumbling with a can opener. He had met Cassandra Voss at a gallery opening in River North 2 weeks into his experiment. She was 29, blonde, socially luminous, and deeply interested in what she called authentic struggle. She believed Julian was a painter named Julian Marsh, who had walked away from a corporate life to pursue meaning through art. He had bought a canvas and some acrylic paints to sell the story. The canvas was bad. Cassandra found it moving. "There's something so raw about a man willing to be poor for his art," she told him over wine, "that cost more than his monthly simulated budget." Julian smiled and thought, "She is perfect." What he could not see, because he had never trained himself to look past the surface of anything that didn't carry a price tag, was that Cassandra's interest in him had the precise texture of a transaction. She was generous, the way investors are generous, with an expected return already calculated. He was not yet aware that his company was bleeding. The hostile takeover attempt had begun quietly, 3 weeks before Julian's experiment launched, a systematic acquisition of distressed debt tied to 3 of Mercer Global's subsidiary shipping firms. Whoever was buying was doing it slowly, deliberately, in a way that suggested they understood not just finance but patience. Daniel had flagged it in his weekly report. Julian had been too busy painting badly and charming Cassandra to respond. Inside the Mercer Tower, senior executives were growing anxious. The board called emergency sessions, and then, without announcement or explanation, the distressed debt positions began to be quietly purchased and neutralized, bought at premium by Meridian Quiet Capital before the hostile buyers could consolidate enough leverage to force a vote. The executives did not know who had saved them. They were grateful anyway. Maria mopped the 4th-floor conference room that evening and listened to them talk through the walls that everyone forgot were thin. She already knew what she had done. As you watch Julian now, moving through his rented life like a man wearing borrowed skin, remember this: the most dangerous illusion is not the one others construct for you. It is the one you build so carefully for yourself that you can no longer see the edges. Julian believed he was the observer of a grand experiment. He had not considered that someone else might be observing him. Cassandra was falling for the fiction. Julian was certain of it. She had begun introducing him to her friends as "my artist," a designation that landed somewhere between trophy and project. She did not ask about his past. She did not ask about his family. She asked whether he had considered submitting his work to a national exhibit, and when he said he couldn't afford the entry fee, she paid it without blinking and called it an investment in beauty. Julian thought, she is generous. He did not think, she is practicing. The crack appeared in week 6. Julian had run out of money on his prepaid card. The experiment, he realized, had a design flaw. He had underestimated how expensive it was to maintain the appearance of affordable life while also courting a woman whose casual brunch cost $40 a person. He called Daniel from a payphone 3 blocks from his apartment, using a burner phone he'd bought at a convenience store. "Top up the card," Julian said. "There's a problem," Daniel replied. The problem was that Julian's personal accounts had been flagged in a federal audit triggered by an anonymous tip about irregular corporate filings. Filings that had been signed under Julian's digital signature, but which Julian had no memory of authorizing. His personal assets were frozen pending investigation. His lawyers were scrambling. Julian stood on a cold Chicago street corner in November and felt, for the first time, something that was not simulation: fear. He returned to his apartment, sat on his IKEA couch, and stared at the ceiling. For 3 days, he did not contact Cassandra. He ate instant noodles and thought about his life with a clarity that the 42nd floor had never offered. He thought about his company and the thousands of people whose salaries depended on decisions he had been too distracted to make. He thought about the hostile takeover and wondered who had stopped it and why. He thought about the woman with the mop who had looked at him the way people look at things they have already solved. On the 4th day, Julian put on his real shoes, not the worn sneakers of Julian Marsh, but the Italian leather of Julian Mercer, and walked back into the Mercer Tower at 2 in the morning, when the building was quiet and the marble floors were being cleaned. Maria was on her knees buffing a scuff mark near the elevator bank when she heard the footsteps. She did not look up. She already knew who it was. "Your fiancé is planning a prenuptial trap," Maria said, wringing out a cloth. "She had a private investigator confirm your identity 3 weeks ago. She knows exactly who Julian Marsh really is." The silence that followed was long and geometric. "How do you know that?" Julian asked. Maria stood. She looked at him without flinching, the way women look at men they have cataloged completely. "Because I paid attention. For 4 years, while you walked past me without seeing me, I paid attention to everything." She handed him a manila envelope. Inside was a detailed dossier on Cassandra's PI firm, on the hostile takeover attempt, on the fraudulent filings that had triggered the audit, and on the identity of Meridian Quiet Capital. Julian's hands were very still as he read. "You saved my company," he said finally. His voice was the voice of a man discovering that the floor beneath him is made of something he did not manufacture. "I saved 14,000 jobs," Maria corrected him quietly. "Your company was a vehicle. The people inside it were not. Never underestimate the person whose name you never bothered to learn. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up in a uniform, doing the work you consider beneath your notice, building something you will one day desperately need." The Gala was Julian's final act of theater, a charity event at the Chicago Art Institute, where he had planned, in front of 200 of the city's most connected people, to reveal his true identity to Cassandra and propose with a ring that cost more than most annual salaries. He had told himself it was romantic. The truth was that it was the end of a game he had designed to make himself feel something without risking anything. Cassandra arrived in a red gown. She looked at him with a warmth that he now recognized as performance. He had been so busy performing himself that he had simply not noticed the mirror. He did not get the chance to speak first. The doors of the ballroom opened, and Maria walked in. She wore a midnight blue dress that moved like water. Her hair was down full and dark and unmistakably intentional. She wore no jewelry except for a single gold cuff on her left wrist that several people in the room recognized as belonging to a very specific private banking tier. Behind her walked two attorneys in dark suits and a woman from the Federal Oversight Board who had, that afternoon, officially cleared Julian's frozen accounts based on a full disclosure filing submitted by Meridian Quiet Capital's legal team. Cassandra's smile flickered. Julian could not move. Maria walked to the center of the room with the ease of someone who had rehearsed nothing, because she had prepared everything. She accepted a microphone from a stunned event coordinator and spoke without preamble. "My name is Maria Okonkwo. I am the majority shareholder of Mercer Global Holdings as of 48 hours ago, following the execution of a legal margin call on assets that were placed at risk through executive negligence." She paused. "I also clean the 4th floor of the building I now own. I do it because I believe in knowing where you come from, even when you've arrived." Cassandra left before the entrees were served. Julian stood at the center of the room his company had paid for and felt the specific quality of silence that follows the collapse of a story you told about yourself. Maria handed him a card at the end of the evening. It read, "Entry-level Operations Coordinator, Mercer Global Holdings. Apply within." "You said everyone has their place in this world," she reminded him. "I did," he said. "I agree." She put on her coat. "Find yours." In the weeks that followed, Maria restructured Mercer Global from the inside out. She implemented profit sharing across all cleaning, maintenance, and logistics staff. She created an internal mobility fund that allowed entry-level employees to fund their own education and training. She renamed the company Meridian Group and put Maria Okonkwo on the masthead in letters that could be seen from across the lobby. Julian submitted his application. He was called in for an interview by a young HR coordinator named Emmanuel Maria's son, who reviewed his resume with professional neutrality and told him that his experience was impressive, but that the role required demonstrated humility, which the team would assess during a 90-day probationary period. Julian Mercer, who had once owned the building, sat in a waiting room chair with a plastic number in his hand and thought about what it means to actually earn a life. He thought about a woman who mopped floors and moved markets and never once asked to be seen because she was already doing what she needed to do. He thought about everything he had been too busy being important to notice. And for the first time in 38 years, Julian Mercer had nowhere to be but exactly where he was. If you are still watching, ask yourself this: who in your life are you walking past? Who is carrying something you haven't thought to ask about? Greatness does not wear a uniform. Wisdom does not announce its floor. Sometimes the person saving your world is the one you never looked up long enough to thank. Do not be Julian. Be the kind of person who sees. And if you found this story moving, if it made you think, share it with one person who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below. Who is the unsung person in your life? We want to hear about them. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week on Naw Tales, We tell the stories the world forgets to notice. Until next time, keep watching, keep feeling, keep seeing.